I'm sure many of you will have questions, but we thought we'd just start with some conversation to start with. So please have a think about what you would like. This is a great opportunity, one might say a rare privilege, to be able to ask of such a distinguished, not just woman, but a distinguished leader in Australian life. So please have a think about any particular questions. But following from the High Commissioner's introduction, the sheer range of jobs or careers that you've had is quite astonishing. How did you decide what to do first, what to do next, and what pushed you in various different directions?
Well, a lot of things had just happened, really. And I think that's probably reflected in the fact that many of the jobs, the roles that I've worked in across a career of 45 years didn't exist. When I was a law student, when I was younger. And I find that quite instructive for myself when I'm talking to young ones about their futures and their careers, which is probably the issue closest to my heart now that I'm an elder, and a role that I take seriously in my community. And just on that point, I do want to say how thrilled I am to be in this gathering this evening, and how much it means to me to be here, because gatherings like this are so enriching and important to us. It's my I'm going off.
Great.
Off my point here, but I haven't been in Kuala Lumpur before, and it's very exciting to travel to a new place. Always, I've been looking forward to it very much, and my links are in education, which has been a very big part of my life. Too, as a student, an academic, as a mother, a grandmother, and I remember in 1960 when I went to university. I was the only girl from my school to go there. There were very few women on the campus, and I was studying politics in my arts degree, and we were studying with a fantastic lecturer, the development, the foundation of Malaysia, and it was while it was happening. And it made a very big impression on me. I just turned 17 and it was a whole exciting new world. And it left a lasting impression, which meant that I have always followed closely this country in so many aspects. So it's terrific to be here. I'm deeply conscious of how much gatherings of alumni mean to us and how important they are. I made wonderful friends in those early years that are so important and influential in our lives long term. It was the first time I'd met young people of my age from this part of the world. And some of them, of course, became lifelong friends who are very dear to my family, to my sisters and me still. And so many connections that we find in a group like this. I saw that yesterday at the IWD lunch again and again. And the most valuable links that our countries share, I think, are through organisations like this one. I mean, the strongest bonds in our friendship between our nations are, I believe, in education and the military, and they're both ones that are very familiar to me. So I just want to say that to you, that I'm looking forward very much to the Q&A, so perhaps I can be some constructive use, but in the meantime I'm going to try and get through this with Angela.
I'm putting my feet up.
Whom I met, it's just an illustration of what I said, when she accompanied my husband and I to Balmoral to visit Her Majesty the Queen before I was sworn in as Governor-General. She was so good to us, and it was such an exciting time and a most wonderful experience in so many ways as you could imagine. One of the most beautiful places in the world, and the gardens were gorgeous and the bagpipes were fantastic, but all, a bit nerve-wracking in some ways too. So, catching up with all old friends, and you're doing a lot of that this evening, it's something that is very important in our hearts and minds, and in our lives, in what we want to achieve too. So where were we?
Balmoral's as good a place as any to be. But just in terms of sort of the choices, I guess, that you made, obviously the connections with people must be some of that, about how you choose from jobs to role to role.
And the choices that I made early on have stood me in great stead, I have to say. Like most 16-year-olds leaving school, thinking about what I was going to do, and my family all thought I was going to become a medical student. I decided that law was the best way that I could put into practice the altruistic, rather noble ideals I had of making the world a better place. We used to write essays in those years on topics like how to promote peace and international understanding. I got a prize for that essay. I look back and think of Joseph Conrad's words, "O youth, the strength of it, the faith of it, the imagination of it." So when I went to law school, there were two women in the whole law school, and there were 17 students in my year. And I was just talking about that to Elizabeth from the embassy, and she said when she was doing law there were several hundred in her year. I mean, it's such a changed world. I have to say that really things evolved and happened, and I didn't have a plan at all, but I certainly grabbed opportunities, and the other determining thing for me was having the wonderful support and encouragement from so many people. And I feel a deep debt of gratitude to pass on that encouragement and support to young ones now, who, although they have so many more opportunities than I could ever have imagined in the 60s, but they still need that. And I love being back on a campus. My office is at a university in Brisbane, at QUT, and to be amongst young ones again, which has been a big part of my life, clever scholars. I'm enjoying that enormously. I try to eavesdrop on their conversation and what are they thinking, and they come and talk to me about all sorts of things, and I have great optimism in their capacity to solve a lot of the really tough problems that we're facing in our world in 2016.
In terms of the support, there's a lot of talk these days about mentorship and what that means. Did you find it in a formal mentoring way, do you think?
Look, there weren't any mentors for my generation, really. There were very few women in the law. In Queensland, when I was called to the bar, the Courier Mail, the newspaper, had this headline saying, 6 called to the bar, including a woman. And I didn't have any mentors, and I found it very difficult to approach people to further my career. I remember particularly going to see a Supreme Court judge because I was very keen to become an associate. It was a very good way to get some experience before going to the bar. And he was so shocked at the idea. He said, "What would people say?" You know? And anyway, lots of stories like that. But never to be deterred, really. But I certainly have had very many people across my life who've supported me in so many ways. People probably who were role models more than mentors, really. And I remember one of them. She was a marvellous woman who was very well known. She's very frail now, and so often in my thoughts, and I go to see her, Dame Beryl Beaurepaire, who chaired the National Women's Advisory Council that I was appointed to. It was the first body like that appointed by the federal government to advise on issues of concern to women. And she was a fantastic leader. And one of the lessons she drilled into us was, go straight to the top, she'd say. And she was a person who could, she used to do that. She'd pick up the phone and you hear her straight on to the Prime Minister. And that was a different world, and there were women's organisations in the political parties like her who were they didn't have power, but they had an enormous amount of influence. Anyway, that advice, go straight to the top, I can tell you. It's got me into trouble a few times. But I've never forgotten it. And the way she opened up opportunities for us, she was older than us. I was in my early 30s, and there were women of all ages on this council of 12. I learned so much from her, and there's been so many remarkable women and some men in my life who've been fantastic to me. When I was tutoring at the law school at Queensland University, I think it's true to say that the tutorial timetable was set around my breastfeeding. Never mentioned, too embarrassing to talk about, even say the word pregnancy or breastfeeding, but it just, happened. This wonderful man, Kevin Ryan, who was a very distinguished professor of law, was an Australian Trade Commissioner, an expert international lawyer, a quiet, shy man when I look back, but how thoughtful he was, and how in the 60s, it was very rare, he understood the hopes and aspirations that many women had, and just did things that showed that in a quiet way. And some of the things you don't notice that are happening around you to do things like that, and you think about them as time goes on, and very many of them.
It's a nice segue into one of the questions I know some of my colleagues had about family and work and what we now call work-life balance, or imbalance, depending on which time of life you're up to. How did you seem like Superwoman, really. How did you balance children, career, family?
Look, I did that mad Superwoman stuff. It was a very trendy thing promoted by women's magazines and women's columns and stuff, that Superwoman and being the perfect hostess, wife, mother, professional woman, everything, and you practically kill yourself doing it. There's no such thing as the Superwoman, but you've got to learn some of these things the hard way. Look, I had some enormous advantages in that my children had 4 grandparents who were wonderful supports to Michael and me. I have to confess, we lived in complete chaos. But it is very hard work, and I think very deeply about it now, because so many young men and women talk to me in a serious way about the challenges of work and family balance, and there's a lot talked about it that's very superficial. But, you know, I had advantages in that I lived near where I worked. I had wonderful neighbours. It was a different world, and I was one of the few women in the paid workforce in my neighbourhood. And, you know, one of my neighbours, if it looked like rain, she'd fold the nappies up and put them in a basket and put them into my house. And, you know, all those casseroles on the back steps when any of us in our neighbourhood were going through difficulties that all families do with sick children. And I learned a lot of very hard lessons. And, you know, one of the very important ones that I learned, that I pass on and I feel passionately about, is for women who have an enormous number of responsibilities must take good care of their health, good care of themselves, and that takes a great amount of self-discipline. It's much easier to be a workaholic than it is to have a balance in our lives, and it's constantly challenging throughout your life. You think when, you know, you get your little children to school, then it'll be easier, and then there's a new set of challenges, and that goes on and on till, you know, you have then parents who are ageing and those responsibilities. And there's an enormous amount of guilt and anxiety we all feel about these things. That's where women and increasingly men share their worries. But at the heart of all this are some really important issues for employers, for our community, and it is getting serious about flexible working practices, and that is starting to happen. But it's got to happen in a real way, not just to be talked about and to be, you know, about a lot of rhetoric, and it involves a lot of change in attitudes and behaviours, trust in working relationships. But I see now very many women who are taking on so many responsibilities, and it worries me, and I do talk to them very seriously about how they must take very good care of their physical, mental, emotional well-being, and that's very hard, to leave time for yourself and time for true relaxation and music and lovely things. It's not about going to a gym, you know. It's about going inside oneself and a quietness. And I think that's becoming harder and harder in our mad, frenetic world. And I think that's so for you know, kids growing up, knowing how to be quiet and still and reflect, and these issues that you know, you think about more deeply. That's one of the things about getting older, I think.
Do you think the structural sort of legislative changes in terms of workplaces have done enough in terms of allowing more flexibility for women? Or is it similarly
But I do
cultural?
know, I was talking to my colleague and very dear friend, Elizabeth Broderick, who was our Sex Discrimination Commissioner till recently. She's a wizard on all of this stuff. And she was telling me about one of our, I can't remember if it's a big bank, but about one of our major employers in Australia is going to make all of the roles in the organisation, you know, fully flexible. She uses that word flex all the time, you know, and it is about changing structures and. But also the attitudes around all that, and so we are moving into a new era. I mean, domestic violence has become a workplace issue now. So our workplaces are changing. But there's also a lot of pressures that we impose on ourselves too. So we need to liberate ourselves from some stereotypes, I think.
You don't seem like someone who ever stepped back very much from hard work. How did you
but hard
manage
work's
it?
great. That's challenging. And one of the things that I've thought about is the way our family life, it enhances our working life, and our working life enhances family life too. They shouldn't be seen as things that are in competition with each other. We need to feel more confident in ourselves about making some choices, and understanding too that we're going to have long working lives, and they're going to be so different. I mean, I can't imagine what my granddaughters' lives will be like at all. So when I'm asked about them and the hopes for them, I think that all I can really do for them is to teach them the things that will stand them in great stead, no matter what the world becomes or what the challenges are that they're going to face, that they have an engagement in the lovely things of music and art and beauty and an understanding of themselves, of the fact that the most important journey in their lives will be to the centre of themselves. Those things, to give them the resilience they'll need to face the challenges ahead of them, because I can't imagine what they'll be when we look at what technology is doing. This morning I was at a wonderful school where there's 1,700 kids. It's a primary school that has a connection with a school in Victoria. And these kids, they talk to each other on video. I mean, that's nothing much, I know, for many people, but I thought how important those connections are, and things we'd never have imagined. And I'm talking to these kids there, and but that's part of the growing up of our young ones.
And can I turn to leadership, because you are a role model, I think, not just for women in Australia but men, in terms of the roles that you've taken on, the advocacy and activist type roles outside perhaps a very linear career structure. Have you had to develop a particular style of leadership, or is it just evolved with the roles that you've taken on, or did you...
Look, there have been sort of opportunities that have come with responsibilities, and also having some fantastic people around me too, who believed in me and understood what I wanted to do and wanted to be part of it. And I've always worked in things that I care about passionately, in a personal, professional and political context. Some marvellous experiences that have been enriching and learning, and as I think about it, I see how important role modelling is, because that's been a very important way for me to understand and learn about leadership. I can think of observing so many people whom I admired, and you think, I want to be like that, in different aspects of work, and how much a good leader, when you have a leader whom you truly admire and respect, how they bring out the best in you. That's something that I learned when I was the CEO and the chairman of my board was somebody I just thought the world of her, and they motivate you and draw the very best out of you, because you want to do your job well, and you'd always do that, but you want to impress them too. That's something that I've thought very strongly about in recent experiences. Learning how to make my rather legalistic style of writing that was pretty turgid to, lighten it up and become a better communicator in my writing, which really was trying to follow a style that I admired so much, and I thought that's how I want to write. And the person who was my example in that, she was the head of the Office of the Status of Women in Canberra. Her name was Cass Taprell, and I was talking about this once, and her sister was in the audience. But I purposely looked into what was it about her writing, and I asked myself, what is it in that person that I see that's so powerful and effective in their leadership? It is a quality leadership. It's not a role or a position, but it's an incredibly important thing. And I've been fascinated by the way it's become. Women's leadership has become such a huge issue in all the international business literature for so long, but it hasn't had the effect of opening up the numbers of opportunities it should for women in Australia, certainly. And I see so many talented, wonderful younger women who yearn for leadership and opportunities, and I want to do what I can to open up those experiences. And I'm very conscious of the fact that as I'm talking about this, that one of the important things we are seeing is the interest of young men and new generation, new attitudes, new behaviours in this too. But also the men leaders who are really stepping up to support women's leadership, because they know and understand how powerful it is in a business context, but also that it is a matter of justice and fairness and those values that we hold dear.
It's such a we could talk all night, but I'm conscious that probably people here have some questions you'd like to ask. Can I? Before I can continue if you wish, but this is your...
I must say, I do feel very optimistic about these important challenges, because I see around me fantastic women and young students at my campus who are so clever and interesting, who handle a lot of different things and are very engaged in these matters.
Good evening, Dame Quentin. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you this evening. My name is Dee Sidhu. I have actually lived between Australia and Malaysia for many, many years. There are many, many topics I'd like to seek your opinion on. Some more contentious than others. But I thought, let's start with something that I think is very important. Australia has had one female Governor-General and one female Prime Minister. Do you think they've benefited from a female Prime Minister, and do you think there will be another one in the near future?
I think that they did. I think that women first are very symbolic in so many ways. And I can tell you the influence they've had, that our first woman Prime Minister had on girls and young ones, that I observed very closely in many contexts, was it was really palpable, and what it did was to show them that was possible, and that's a very powerful thing, and there are particular pressures on being a first too, and I think the discussion around all that's been very interesting too. But of course, a woman does make a difference, and it's tough for very many women first, but very few of them talk about it. Very few of them even write about it. Because the pressure on them, I think, is so enormous, they become very self-contained about that. Oh yes, I think very powerful messages come to younger generations in particular, but they also stand as a source of courage, support, and inspiration in many ways. And we won't be able to measure them for some time, I don't think.
Hi, Quentin. Thanks very much for speaking to us tonight. I have to confess that when I told my grandma that I was coming to see you today, that she insisted that we get a photo together. So
I've heard that story before.
You're not just successful in your career, but you've also managed to become one of Australia's biggest fashion icons. So I'm actually from Jabiru, a small town.
I know Jabiru.
I had a single mum who was a very powerful woman in my life, and so the first time I've come to Asia, I found it a little bit weird coming to terms with the way and the place that women have in everyday life. And so I'm here on one of the new Combo Plan scholarships, and I just concluded 6 months of study at the University of Malaya. And one of the things that I picked up on was that a lot of the students, female students in the lectures, would communicate to lecturers by speaking to males sitting alongside them. They wouldn't feel comfortable enough to just engage directly in conversation. And I found that quite a large juxtaposition from law school back in Australia, where women dominate discussion.
Really?
So I'm asking you whether you think that religious or cultural justifications for women having a lower position in society is acceptable, and if you disagree, how can you change the opinion of women who may not necessarily want change to happen?
There's some very heartland issues in what you're talking about, but I am passionately committed to the human rights principle, the recognition of the dignity and worth of every human being. And one of the things that I've seen again and again across my life, and as Governor-General I travelled to 55 countries representing Australia, I have seen so many times that the bonds that women share, whatever our background, race, religion, language, wherever we come from, whoever we are, we have these very strong bonds of understanding. We share our hopes and aspirations, and the depth of those bonds is to be found in the deep responsibility, the deep commitment we have to the future, to our children and our grandchildren, to their health, education, employment, and I find in that an enormous amount of personal strength myself, and the key word really is respect. I'm a little surprised when you say that you've been in classrooms in a law school where all the girls run the show. I'm terribly pleased to hear it, because I think that very many young women in Australia have quite a lack of confidence in and need to be encouraged, as I was, I suppose, at the same age, to back themselves and to speak up. And perhaps that's come with the increasing numbers of law students. I understand that they're over half the numbers in law schools, just unimaginable. But that is so too in this country. I've learned, they are issues of culture and behaviour and attitudes, and wherever they are in the world, we want to ensure that they're not barriers to developing the full potential of every single person. But I think how lucky you are to be having the experience of being one of the new Colombo Plan students and being here, and it will add another dimension to your life, and so many understandings that you will value forever. But those, at women's meetings, and I always get one together whenever I can, because that's how I find out about the things that I care deeply about. There are universal themes, and they are about the futures of our young ones, but also about concerns that the rights of women are being wound back in some parts of the world, and also the issue that is most important in my agenda of violence against women. That is the most grave human rights issue around the world, I believe. And they're the things that I've been talking about with men and women around tables since I've been here.
Thank you, Quentin, for the sharing session. My name is Alumni. I've been teaching law for the last 20 years, so that is just one common thing to share. So I'm just trying to make a comment about your experience. I just had a tutorial because I teach a number of 30 students, and the problem I face in my lecture is getting the guys to speak. I guess it's a question of you as an educator trying to identify how to, try to get the students to speak out and share irrespective of the gender. So that's my view on certain things. I was looking at the way that you have moved on from one job to another, from one post to another, and I'm sure that there has been challenges along the way. When you decide to move on from one position to a higher position, of going up or going sideways, what were the considerations that you had to, factor into when you want to move on?
Look, they were very much about opportunities, really, and that's an important message I like to hand on. Is about grasping them and being out there so they come to you as well. And I'm a person who likes to either be starting something up or fixing up a mess. Someone said to me a while ago, "Why have you always worked in such confrontational areas?" And I thought, I suppose I have, really. But I went. There are reasons, of course, when you reflect, and I was teaching at law school, I became very engaged in community issues because I was one of the few women lawyers around, and I taught legal aspects of social work. I became involved in areas of reform with other people in Queensland in issues that I cared about very deeply, about children, the welfare of children, their health, issues to do with juvenile justice reform. I'm talking now about the 60s and 70s, where in Queensland there were a lot of serious issues around what we talked about later as children's rights. And, you know, one thing evolved into another, and I was asked to become engaged in community organisations at a grassroots level. And I think that's the way many of my generation, and women particularly, continue to become engaged, is in their neighbourhood, where you learn so much. You know, after so they were things that really developed, you know, I went to the United States to look at the children's rights movement. Was when we were first talking about child abuse, about mandatory reporting of child abuse, about adoption issues, and I saw a number of activists working in that field, including the Children's Defence Fund that was then led by Hillary Clinton, and a number of women who've become very prominent in the United States since then. You know, one thing really led to another and involved, and they were heady times of legal and social reform in the women's movement, and in the development of human rights and international instruments, you know, I was appointed because of that work to some government organisations, and then when, you know, human rights machinery was established, I applied for jobs, and things happened in a way. One led into another, of course there were many hard times in a lot of ways, really, for me, and I did learn some very hard lessons about how to manage my own life, I suppose, and they're the things that I share with younger women, the lessons that I learned, really, juggling a whole lot of things, and so I never like to give the slightest impression that I was any kind of a superwoman, but I belong to a generation of women who got together, and when we didn't have the services, the things that we wanted, we'd start them ourselves, and we learned how to do that at a very grassroots level. And you know, it was the era of the women's movement at a grassroots national and international level, being inspired by people, you know, getting issues like violence against women onto the international agenda, and always working with others to do that. And, you know, working in our Human Rights Commission, some pretty tough confronting issues too, that when I look back at prison reform, the legal responses to drugs and you know, social problems that we'd never have imagined. I don't know if I've answered your question, but they were things that evolved, and sometimes when opportunities would come up, I'd think, how would I be able to do that? And of course, my husband was very important in this too. I'd say, you know, I really want to take up this role, but how can I do it? And he would always say, well, look, let's give it a go. We'll work it out. As I said, I did have a lot of support. You can't do anything on your own.
Hi, good day. Clearly to most of the Malaysian. My name is Alumni. Thank you very much. I thank Quentin for coming here for the first time to Malaysia. And welcome. My name is Alumni. I'm a lecturer at the University of Kebangsaan Malaysia, the National University of Malaysia. And I was doing my PhD at the University of Queensland while you were the boss.
Oh, really?
And I love Lady Boss. And it's, possibly the same with Aiman at the University of Malaya. At UKM, the recruitment number or ratio is about 70 to 30. 70 girls and 30 boys to University of Malaysia. But what I can see, numbers of personnel in the government or even the political cabinet of the government, majority male, right? So where do you think lies the missing link? Where do you reckon lies the missing link?
Look, that's a question we're all asking ourselves, and there are a lot of excuses made as to explain the way we have so many talented, well-educated women who aren't getting into leadership roles and are very poorly represented in many areas of public life and corporate life and in academic institutions. And of course there are those who say, well, it'll happen. You know, I've been told all my life, just settle down, be patient, it'll happen. I think that, you know, around the world this week as we mark International Women's Day, people are saying the progress is too slow, despite all the advances and the achievements and the hard work that we need to be making, as the UN's called it, a pledge for parity. And a very key issue is the engagement of men, and programs like the Male Champions of Change that we have in Australia that was introduced by the Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner. And one of the things that I'm doing in the work I'm engaged in now in domestic violence is working with our male leaders, the CEOs of our big companies, to get their support in getting the issue around the business sector and getting people to confront it, but also taking action in their organisations, because domestic violence is a gendered issue. It's about gender inequality and it's power. I think that we have within our grasp the opportunity to accelerate progress, and we have to be optimistic about that. We can't feel powerless and disillusioned. We just have to accelerate the progress, and it's why I have always been a supporter of quotas, because I think it's very tiresome to keep talking about some of these things over and over and over again. I think that there is a great deal of prejudice still around in the society that I'm a part of. So there's some hard work to do, and it won't just happen. That's what we know, but it's not fair either.
Nicole?
Good evening, and welcome to Malaysia. On behalf of the Malaysia Australia Alumni Council and our president is Pat Roy here, we welcome you. My name is Nicole. I'm the Vice President for International Relations. Before I proceed with the question, I'd like to thank the Australian High Commission for giving us an opportunity to work with them at this event. Now, on behalf of the MAC, we would like to highlight a trend that we're seeing now in Australia as well as in Malaysia, where we are seeing more and more women who are heading the universities and education institutes. So we have more director of studies, director of head of faculties, and also there's an increase of vice chancellors for women in Australia in the recent years. So what's your view on the trend? And the second question would be Malaysia, our society as context, we lie in between of the more conservative society and the very modern Western society. So we're somewhere in the middle. Now, as a woman, especially if you are married and you have kids and all, when you are at the workplace, you are an employee, you are a manager. If you are too assertive, you're being seen to be too aggressive. If you're being too soft, you're being to see like typical women who can't be able to perform as compared to the male employee. How do you seek a balance in that? Now, the same women, when you're playing the role domestically, you're a mother to your child, you're a wife to your husband, you are a daughter to your parents, you're also a daughter-in-law who have to take care of the parents-in-law as well. And by facing all these expectations in your private life, how do you seek a balance and while you're trying to be the best of you and the expectations from all these parties that you're super women, how do you actually send out a message to say that you're not actually, you don't want to be seen as a super woman so that you actually have a room to kind of fall back a bit? Because sometimes when I speak to my friends, my female friends, and they'll joke and say, one of my friends actually said, sometimes, I just wish that in my house that I can have a room to die for 5 minutes. So what is your opinion?
Well, that's very important. That's why I say, it is about the self-discipline that it involves, and their issues for a family, for partners to talk about in an open and honest way. But the first thing you asked was about
women in universities.
Women in universities. Look, I think it's still true to say in Australia, I don't carry these figures in my head as I used to once, but I think it's true to say that academic women, as in many other areas of our society, are they're in higher numbers, but they're still at the lower levels. I don't think that we're anywhere near equal numbers in the top leadership levels and in the vice chancellors and chancellors' roles. It's changing, but I think that's pretty slow too. And there are many women now who are saying, if not 50%, why not? Yes, progress is so slow, and the business case has been made again and again. We can't waste the talents and the capacities of half of our populations when we're talking about economic growth. Even getting the need to have more women participating in our economy. But the other issue, is about the work-life balance, and that is about really engaging men in that, and that goes right back to breaking down the stereotypes and ridding ourselves of those old-fashioned stereotype roles about girls and boys, and because men have those family responsibilities too. Too often all the caring is left to women, all the caring roles, and they end up looking after frail and ageing parent in-laws as well. So, these are about culture and behaviour and attitudes, and we have to press on with that. I have to say, I do see a lot of changes in that in my own family. I have 5 adult children and grandchildren, and I watch them and their friends, the men, being much more engaged, very anxious to be home and to see more of their children and to live lives that are different from their parents' lives in their parenting and their mothering and fathering. But, all those stereotypes you mention in relation to women's behaviour, they're extremely tiresome too. We're always being told how to fix ourselves up and how to change ourselves, and how we should speak, how we should dress, all those things. But we have to be, we have to be ourselves and be authentic, and of course that's one of the most significant qualities of leadership. It's hard, this stuff, but it's possible, and once again, it is about how boys and girls are brought up. All of us have a role here to play as parents and as grandparents. Yeah. Otherwise, women they're exhausted, can't do it.
Quentin, thank you very much for coming to Malaysia and speak to us this evening as well. My name is William, and I used to study in Adelaide and work in Melbourne and the Gold Coast for many years before I moved back to Malaysia. So my question is, with more and more women moving into public life, and moving up the ladder, so my question is basically, how would you challenge and advise younger women in today's life to basically go for public life? Now, those who aspire to go into public life, what is your advice and challenge for them? Thank you.
Well, it's about really encouraging them to do it, and I meet so many women. There have been some I've met here where I've said to one of my colleagues, she should go into politics. Because I think here in this country it's about 10%.
It's not very high.
Anyway, it's not very high. In our country it's 30%, and progress has been very slow getting women into our parliaments, and it's tough. A lot of women don't like a lot of what they see about political life, but we must support and encourage them. And one thing I will say, I've been very close to political life in many different ways. I have certainly made a decision a long time ago to stay out of party politics and to be on the outside, and to engage as an activist and a campaigner for change, an advocate. But I have the most enormous respect for people who choose to serve democracy in political life, because it's incredibly hard, and it's been through women getting behind, encouraging others to do that, and recognising the talents and being aware of the importance of our all the leadership of our nation to be diverse, to be representative, and but I am very committed to supporting young women in a personal way, doing it quietly in the background, helping them do some networking, things that I can think of that might make a difference to them, fulfilling their potential and bringing their dreams into reality.
And maybe we've already taken quite a lot of
Have
your
we?
evening, but just one last question, a reprise.
First few conversations, I was thinking, this thing, I think the hype about cultural background, I think sometimes it's us ladies who put ourselves in a difficult position and using that as a reason for us not to accept challenges that is thrown to us. I was just sharing, I'm just sharing a discussion I had with a colleague from Australia. And the husband has just been appointed to a chair in the UK. So we're trying to ask her whether she was going or not. And then during the discussion, she just, said something like this. She mentioned that he just told me that he's going. It's nice to be asked, So I was thinking that maybe this hype about women not stepping up and that has got to do with culture, it may not necessarily be true. So it's a question of, I think, of a personal commitment of whether or not you want to take up the challenge. I think that's very, very crucial issue that needs to be conveyed to the younger generation, that you can't be relying on the fact that you come from a particular community and therefore there's this expectation of you having to comply with certain role model.
Well, that's an increasing issue where when women and men have careers, and how do they resolve opportunities that come along? I've had that happen to me. When I was appointed or in looking at taking up the appointment as the Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner, it was something I desperately wanted to do, but I lived in Brisbane. It would mean an enormous amount of national and international travel. And I had 5 young children, and I talked about it to my husband. That's when he said, well, let's give it a go. Let's see how we can work it out. And, you can't do that when you're talking about different hemispheres, but there are ways now where many partners who have careers either take turns or, how they handle those challenges, and that is about real partnership. But that's something that's going to become more and more frequently an issue. Of course, technology is going to make a lot of difference to these things, and many of these tough challenges of handling competing responsibilities and opportunities, I think they'll become easier in many ways, and there are ways of solving those issues. I mean, you'd never have imagined it once. When I was a girl, the only way you could get from Sydney to England, it took 4.5 weeks on a ship. And, now you can press a few buttons and be talking to somebody there. But a lot of these things, they are personal issues where problems have to be solved with a trust and candour in communication. And they're very tough. But, I mean, what you're talking about is an absolutely outrageous thing, and it's unacceptable, I think. And that's where sharing experiences and problem solving and coming to agreements are very important. It's the ultimate negotiating, I guess. Yeah.
Would you like? I think so much ground has been covered, and we could, of course, talk for so much longer. There are obviously issues that have touched everybody here in their workplaces, in their families, in how we respond to public life and the people who lead us, and how we choose our leaders. Dame Quentin, you're an inspiration, I think, to a lot of us here, and a role model. Possibly superwoman. I think Rod called you a superstar before. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and making us think about it.
Thank you.